You're watching Euronews now. I'm Tacumbo Silanko with your top stories. Tributes are being paid to David Sassoli, the president of the European Parliament, who's died at the age of 65 of serious complications from an immune system dysfunction. The United States and Russia remain at loggerheads over European security and arms control, but agreed to more talks to end the crisis over Ukraine. And Boris Johnson faces fresh anger over news Downing Street organised another party at number 10 during the UK's lockdown.
5 voti.
President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, has died, aged 65. He had been hospitalised for several weeks with complications linked to his immune system. He passed away in the early hours of Tuesday morning in Aviano, Italy. The former journalist and centre-left politician had suffered a lot of recent setbacks to his health. In September, he was taken to a hospital in Strasbourg and treated for pneumonia. Sassoli left journalism and became an MEP in 2009. He was a member of the centre-left Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. He beat 3 other candidates to become president of the European Parliament in July 2019. The Italian politician had already expressed his desire to not seek re-election, and a vote to elect his replacement had already been planned for later this month. European politicians have already started to send their condolences.
Bonjour, chers collègues.
There's a feeling of shock and sadness in the European quarter here in Brussels today and outside the European Parliament as people here come to terms and digest the news of the death of the Italian socialist and former president of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, who passed in Italy just last night. Throughout the morning, messages of condolences have been coming through from politicians from all across the board, from the head of the European Commission, from the head of the European Council, and from MEPs here in the House who say they've lost a friend, a true European and a champion for democracy. And it's not just those in politics who'll be mourning the death of David Sassoli, but rather journalists, not just here in Brussels, but over in Italy, where he was formerly a renowned television anchor and TV journalist before entering the world of politics and becoming an MEP here in 2009. As an MEP, he was known for being extremely hardworking, diligent, a details man, known for pushing through hard legislation in the transport sector and working thoroughly on the budget. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, Brussels.
Talks in Geneva between Russia and the United States have ended with little compromise in sight. Moscow remained firm in its key demand that Ukraine never become a NATO member. Washington insisted the alliance's open-door policy would continue. The US again threatened Moscow with heavy consequences if it invades Ukraine. Russia still says its troop deployment to the border is a defensive measure.
We have the impression that the American side has taken the Russian proposals very seriously, having analyzed them thoroughly. For our part, we have presented in detail to the Americans the logic and content of our proposals, explaining why it is absolutely imperative to obtain guarantees of the non-expansion of NATO.
We've made it clear that if Russia further invades Ukraine, there will be significant costs and consequences well beyond what they faced in 2014. Those costs will include financial sanctions, and it's been reported those sanctions will include key financial institutions, export controls that target key industries.
The talks have kicked off an intense diplomatic week, with the NATO-Russia meeting scheduled for Wednesday in Brussels and a meeting of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe on Thursday in Vienna.
Kazakhstan's president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, has appointed a new prime minister to head his government. The head of state put the deputy prime minister from the previous cabinet, Alihan Smailov, forward for the role. His candidacy was announced via video conference while members of his parliament unanimously approved Smailov for the position. This comes as the former finance minister temporarily assumed leadership amid last week's violent protests that led to the dismissal of the full cabinet. On Monday, Tokayev joined European Council President Charles Michel on a video link and claimed that militants from Afghanistan, Central Asia and the Middle East were behind the unrest. During the discussions, he denied the use of armed forces against protesters, saying that his country had faced unprecedented acts of aggression, forcing him to take urgent measures to restore constitutional order. Charles Michel said later on social media that he'd expressed condolence for the loss of life on Kazakhstan's Day of Mourning and stressed the need to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Meanwhile, thousands of Russian troops who are deployed in the country at the request of Tokayev to quell the unrest will begin to leave in 2 days. The president said the withdrawal will take 10 days to complete.
The strengthening of Russia's position in Kazakhstan will take place. Many people are calling for the preservation of the country's sovereignty, for the need, on the contrary, to distance oneself and to lead the country towards political reforms. But Tokayev hasn't said anything about it.
We want to return to normal life. It was so beautiful here, and now so ruined. Looking at it is so depressing and exhausting. We want to return to normal life.
The Central Asian country held a national day of mourning on Monday for those who died during the upheaval and the crackdown that followed. An American has become the first person in the world to get a heart transplant from a genetically modified pig. Doctors say David Bennett is doing well, 3 days after the experimental 7-hour procedure that took place in Baltimore. The transplant was considered the last hope of saving the 57-year-old's life, though it is not yet clear what his long-term chances of survival are. It was either die or do this transplant, Mr. Bennett explained a day before the surgery.
I think it's significant because we don't have a source of human organ replacement. And there are people who, because of the scarcity of the human heart and its relative value, who just are not included in transplantation for age and other reasons.
Doctors at the University of Maryland Medical Center were granted a special exemption by the US medical regulator to carry out the procedure on the basis that Mr. Bennett would have otherwise died. For the medical team who carried out the transplant, it marks the culmination of years of research and could change lives around the world.
After days of legal wrangling, Novak Djokovic has announced he's now fully focused on defending his Australian Open crown. The 34-year-old, who was back in training within hours of leaving an immigration detention hotel, won an appeal against his visa cancellation, seemingly allowing him to compete in next week's Grand Slam despite not being vaccinated against COVID-19. Speaking at a press conference in Belgrade, the world number one's parents called it the biggest victory in their son's career, whilst his brother added that justice had been served.
Novak is free. Novak was earlier on a tennis court. He was training. He went to Australia to play tennis before anything, to fight for himself, to play, to try to win another Australian Open, and to break another record that he is chasing tirelessly.
Novak Djokovic simultaneously took to Twitter to express his gratitude towards the judge and his supporters, but there may yet be a further twist in the tale as Australia's Immigration Minister Alex Hawke still has powers to re-cancel the visa and deport the unvaccinated player, with his decision expected later this week. The Australian Open kicks off on the 17th of January, with the draw taking place on Thursday.